Welcome to Season 11 of Conservation Connection. We do exactly what it sounds like, introduce you to people working in the field of conservation. I'm Sarah Catherine.
And I'm Chance.
And we're back.
We are so excited to be back for Season 11. We have some really cool interviews coming down the line in the next couple weeks, but we figured we'd start things off with something a little different.
Some of the feedback we hear a lot from our listeners and friends is that they want to hear more from us and more about us. So, a couple months ago, we had the opportunity to do an interview with Mark Titus, who runs the Save What You Love podcast. And basically, that interview was just talking about who Chance and I are, what Conservation Connection is, and all the like. So, this is your opportunity to get to know us.
Oh, how the tables have turned and the interviewer becomes the interviewee. It's pretty much unchanged from what Mark Titus posted on his podcast. Again, that's the Save What You Love podcast, where he talks about how people can save what they love. He's a really great guy, and we had a lot of fun talking with him.
In this interview, you can expect to learn about how we started the business, the cheesy details of how we met, and you can also hear about how Chance got the name Chance. So if you heard in our last episode of last season with Blowfish, you know that Chance is not Chance's legal name. So you get to hear that story in this episode.
Yeah, it's kind of a behind-the-scenes sneak peek of how we run Conservation Connection and some of the fun stuff that we get to do with it.
So with that, enjoy this episode.
Sarah and Chance, welcome. Where are you guys today?
So we are in Columbus, Georgia. It's right on the border between Georgia and Alabama. This is our home base.
And how often are you at home base these days? I know you're on the road a lot.
It just depends from month to month, honestly. The last 3 months, I think we were here for maybe 10 days solid, 5 days at a time, here and there, 3 days here, 2 days there, 5 days here.
But luckily this summer we're getting a fair amount of time in a row at home. So we've been here for a couple of weeks and we're enjoying that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was just going to ask, how does that make you feel? Do you get restless to want to get back out there? Or are you like, thank you, just a little bit of a respite?
For me, I have to say, typically I get restless. I'm like, okay, when is our next thing? When are we going somewhere else? But this time I was ready to be home. I told Chance as we were nearing our last things, I was like, can we just spend a week at home, just a week where we're not doing anything?
Which is a stunning reversal because I'm typically the homebody. I like having roots. I like being in one place for a while and, taking care of my fish tank and having, the yard look nice. And so it was very refreshing to hear her say that she wanted to come home and be here for a minute. Although I am ready, I think, to get things kicked off for our next season.
I understand. I understand both of those things, and we can hold both of those things. Wanting to have some respite and some time, and I recently had a retreat where it was phone gone, completely off for 5 days, all the things quieted down and out in nature, and it was perfection. And I came back to all the things and the noise, and at first I was really still floating on that magic carpet from nature and gradually sort of reintegrated, and now I'm just kind of annoyed with all the noise. Yeah. We talked earlier about the guys beeping on the construction across the way. So, dear listener, hope you're not going to hear any of that today. Well, y'all, let's start with the good stuff. Tell us your story. Where did you each grow up, and how did you each fall in love with the natural world?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up not very far from here, just south of Atlanta, Georgia. Hour and a half from where we live now. And I grew up taking summer vacations with my family to the beach, a little place called Cape San Blas on the panhandle of Florida, and just really learned to love the ocean there and connect with nature. My grandmother, made sure to take every opportunity to track down the local turtle beach patrol and be like, oh, can we go out with you? And, my daughter loves animals, so can we, go look for turtles with you? And they were very gracious to have us along. And I think that's kind of where the love for it started. And then, of course, had a family who made sure to, let me go to summer camps at the aquarium. And I was just always looking for ways to get more involved with nature.
How old do you think you first kind of got the bug? Do you remember?
I mean, honestly, for as long as I can remember. So I remember, I think my earliest memory is I must have been like 3 years old. I was born in another small town called Natchez, Mississippi. And I remember going out on this jet ski on a lake with my dad and looking for birds and crocodiles. And I don't have many memories from that age, but that's just like a brief little thing that I really remember. So yeah, for as long as I can remember, I've always wanted to do something with wildlife, nature. I wanted to be a dolphin trainer when I grew up, and I did that for a while before we started our own business. But yeah, I have always just had a passion and love for nature.
Wow. Well, first of all, before Chance, we get to you hit the 99%, or you're rather in the 1% of the people who actually get to be a dolphin trainer. I physically know multiple people that said they wanted to do that, and you've done it. So you're ahead of the curve. Well done.
I'm a very determined person.
Literally, one of my favorite things about Sarah Catherine is that when she wants to do something or like sets her mind to it, you need to get out of the way because it's gonna happen. Basically,
I love that. I love that we're teaming up too, because that makes me happy. I can identify with that. Well, Chance, how about you? Do you go back that far? Do you have memories from 3 or even before of just being in love with the natural world?
So I always tell people that I was born loving animals. It was very intrinsic in just who I am. My parents were both very sports-oriented people, captained the football team, played softball in college at a very high level, and I was never, ever, ever into that. They put me in soccer when I was about probably 4, and I was the goalie because I didn't want to run, because who wants to run? And I spent the entire game, all season long, just sitting in the grass and looking at the aphids and the ladybugs and the little creepy crawlies and wondering why the ball was occasionally flying past my head and like why they were kicking it towards me. So it's something that nature has always held my fascination. The first memory that I really, really have of that is my dad graduated from the Air Force Academy and was in the military, the Air Force, my entire life. And when I was really small, we went to the Air Force Academy to go see a football game as sort of like a, hey, this is what your dad used to do kind of thing. And which obviously I didn't care about the game at all. Totally sitting in the bleachers, like watching the bugs fly by and stuff like that. And until halftime comes around, and it's tradition that at halftime for the USAFA games, they fly a gyrfalcon through the stadium. So they've got a falconer come out, they fly their mascot, and it just perfectly aligned in the universe that bird flew probably within 3 feet over my head. And I was like dead silent for the rest of the day. I remember that. And I remember thinking I'm getting chills talking about it now, but that connection with something wild is what I want to do with the rest of my life. And so from a very, very early age, I knew that I wanted to go into this world. And I was just really fortunate to have parents who, although they didn't know much about this world, they put as much effort into giving me these experiences as like a soccer mom puts into getting their kids to practice. Like they were very intentional about creating opportunities for young Chance to interact with nature and learn about it and learn how to communicate about it.
Go mom and dad.
Yeah,
well
fantastic
done.
Parents.
And what were you, like 4 or 5 years old when you changed your name?
Yes, so legally my name is not Chance. It's Brooks is my given name. And in first grade, so I think I was 4 or 5, I looked at my mom and I was like, Mom, I'm a chance for wildlife. Call me Chance. And she was like, all right, sure, why not? Little flower child, go for it. And I didn't know how to spell Chance at the time. So like we've got school papers where I spelled Chance, C-H-A-N-S, because that's the sound that it ended on, was a sound. So we figured that out eventually. We got there by 2nd grade. But it's literally always been my life is caring about the environment and trying to get other people to care.
That is so rad. And think about if you stuck with the original spelling, though, where you could go with that. All the interpretation. You could be Sean's or...
Could be like French. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
God, we got to stop doing that.
My wife's name is Venka. It's spelled Wenche, and you can imagine the creative pronunciations she gets with that. She's super stoked about that. But Wenche, the wench, she loves that one.
I'm sure that's a favorite.
Yeah, but you can't go wrong with Chance. That's super rad. And Sarah Catherine is beautiful as well. So you guys are batting 1,000. Now I got to ask, before we get into the meat of the matter here, how did you meet? How did you two meet? How did you come together?
Yeah, I guess I'll tell that story. So along with the dolphin training ride that I was on, that looked like lots of internships, lots of volunteering, lots of unpaid work before I finally started working in that field. So after I graduated college, I graduated from Auburn, and I took an internship down in the Florida Keys at a dolphin center down there. And Chance just happened to be working with a friend that I knew down in the Florida Keys. It was actually the person I was going to be living with while I was doing that internship. And so I guess unbeknownst to him is how the story goes on his side. She had him come over for dinner that night, and as far as I knew it, he was there to help me move my dresser. And I basically drove my Jeep down. I had a dresser and a suitcase of clothes, and that's all I had.
I did not know that I was there to move the dresser. I was just hanging out with my friend, and she was like, oh, by the way, a friend who's come to stay with me is going to get here in a couple hours. You want to hang out? I was like, sure, why not?
Yeah, you're going to help me move this person in. I drove up. He helped me move that dresser in, and I went out to dinner with another friend. But we very quickly realized that we just had this really similar passion and these similar stories. And I just, over time, I wasn't looking for any kind of relationship, but over time I just fell in love with the person that Chance is, and, his past and like his passions and his care for the world. And we aligned so much that we tried out a relationship, and it just happened to work.
And I always tell people that, so the nonprofit that eventually became Conservation Connection, the idea for that predates our relationship. We were not dating. We were friends, but, there was nothing romantic had happened yet when we were like, how cool would it be if we went into business together and started doing this, mass media stuff, or just this work connecting people to our environment who can't or don't otherwise connect to it. How can we reach the people that can't come down to the Florida Keys and go see dolphins or experience an aquarium or the natural environment outside? How can we work with them? That was maybe 2 weeks into knowing each other, because it was so clear that we had that passion together. And luckily, everything else happened to work out, that we got to, fall in love and have a life partner and also be able to run a business together.
It's really cool. You're still in that 1%, maybe even bursting a little bit lower. Hey, that's a wonderful story. So let's lead right into it. Then we've got the seed. You've got this bright, shining little jewel of an idea. We all know it takes a lot to move from bright, shining little jewel into lifting something off the ground and manifesting it into the world. How did that happen?
So we had been chewing on this idea of a nonprofit, or we actually didn't even know it was going to be a nonprofit at the time, just some sort of science and environmental communications group. And living in the Keys at the time, at that point we were working for Florida Keys Aquarium Encounters, doing education there, working with the public. And then Hurricane Irma made landfall as a Category 5 hurricane in Marathon, which was where we worked, and really did a lot of damage to the environment there, or to the buildings and the culture and everything. And we were very fortunate that our home was not destroyed, and we evacuated before there was any damage. So we really personally didn't lose a whole lot, but our community did. So we spent about 6 months after the storm hit working with the aquarium and helping them rebuild, because it was an outdoor aquarium. So, there's a lot of damage to the facility, and, just helping out neighbors and friends. And luckily we were able to get paid to do some of that work through the aquarium and stuff like that. And we kind of looked at each other and had this moment of this feels like the universe is giving us an opportunity to take stock of where we are and where this path is going to lead in 5 years, and is that where we want to be? And we decided that in order to build Conservation Connection and what we wanted it to be, we needed to live somewhere that we had a little more economic freedom and just could be in sort of this cocoon while we're growing and building this idea. So we actually left the Keys in early 2018 and moved into Sarah Catherine's parents' basement. Every millennial's dream is to start a nonprofit podcast from their in-laws' basement, and we nailed that.
You guys are crushing all these dreams. It's amazing.
Just crushing it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was definitely kind of the beginning of that journey. You know, it's hard to live in the Florida Keys, right? It's expensive, and you're pretty much spending every dollar you make to live there. So we were working part-time down there. So on the days that we had off, we would go and kind of have these planning sessions. And yeah, we very fortunate to have, both of us have very supportive families who helped us accomplish this dream and this goal and support us as we were starting it up, along with like other random part-time jobs that we picked up. And, you know, it didn't initially start as a podcast. The biggest part of what we did was working with school systems and, you know, helping students get out in nature, helping teachers find ways to still meet their standards and teach the curriculum they need to teach, but also connect with nature and not just be reading out of a book, essentially. So that's kind of where it all started. But yeah, it was definitely a journey to begin it.
Yeah.
What I say a lot of the time is just that I don't know how to do anything else. This is what I love. It's been a passion since before I knew what a passion was. It's just part of who I am, and that's true for Sarah Catherine as well. And so, yeah, I just can't turn my back on it. Even when, you know, there's months and months where we haven't been paid because we're in between gigs for the nonprofit, or there's late nights of categorizing transactions so that we can do our financial fiduciary duty for the nonprofit or whatever. Even in all of those hard times, it's all in service to this thing that we love so much and care about so much. And we get to see some real successes with it. So it's worth it, you know?
Yeah, there's just such a fundamental difference waking up every day and working really hard, but loving what you're doing. And I mean, it really is true. Yeah, it doesn't diminish the amount of toil and work and sweat and frustration, all those things, but it does feel like you're not really working. You're no person who loves what they do. You both are very intentional. That's super clear. And also, I think, attentional. You pay attention to what's happening around you and integrate that into your life's decisions. So with that as a backdrop, what would you say the core mission for Conservation Connection is? What are you hoping to do out there with this work?
Yeah, so our official nonprofit goal is to create opportunities for people to learn how to care for the planet by creating engaging programs and bringing them to them wherever they are. So when I boil that down, what we do is we help people have a relationship with nature. Full stop.
Great.
That's the kernel of what it is.
Wonderful. But we can park it right there. And I think that is a life well lived if you even get near that. So let's get a little more specific, though. I've talked with scientists on this show and while filming my docs over the years, and they've told me that communicating their research and data in a compelling way to the general public is a real challenge. I know this is a core issue you have tackled too. How have you two approached this, especially with young students or rather students in general and young scientists?
Yeah, definitely. It is one of the big issues that we've seen. And early on in the podcast, we were like, you know, this is really kind of a core part of what we're doing. Is initially we just wanted to talk to scientists, really. I don't think when we started, it was like, we want to help communicate science because it's lacking. But there was a part of us that knew that we wanted to tell stories differently. So I think when we started like science communication as like a field or like a concept wasn't so much here yet. Like we didn't hear that a lot. But we knew that talking to scientist friends of mine that I went to college with and stuff like that, that there was an issue sometimes with how stories were told. Very sensationalized and over the top, and then not really hitting on the core issues. It's like, okay, well, you told this in an entertaining way, and we got some information, but did we get the information that the scientist is really trying to share? So Chance, I guess, can tell a little bit more about how we've folded that into the podcast as we've moved forward and how we try to help young scientists focus on that.
Yeah,
Great.
because for me, science, even if you're counting the hairs on a fruit fly, science is exciting because at the core of what science is it's learning things that nobody has ever known before. It is a real life, discovery novel that's playing out in front of your life, in front of your eyes, and you get to be the main character of that. And I think that is, regardless of the science happening, I think that is always interesting, but that's just me. I have that intrinsic draw towards discovery and curiosity and stuff like that. But I also have a huge amount of experience in public speaking and communicating. And, I have a degree in biology. I did original research in herpetology in my undergraduate, but I also have a bachelor's degree in theater because I always knew that I wanted to be involved, right? There's not many of us out there, but the science can only go so far on its own. It needs help to get in front of the people who need to hear it. And it's not fair to ask a scientist who has spent 12 plus years honing their technical skills to also be experts in communicating that story to the public. I think we really get tied up in the idea that I as an individual or we as a team of two have to do all of the work. Mm-hmm. I have to take care of every aspect from start to finish. And that's just not true. We work in a community. Nothing exists in a vacuum. And so we work really hard to be excited about the nitty-gritty details. And Sarah Catherine and I do this duet thing where I, as the research background and as the really science techie guy, love to dig into those details. And Sarah Catherine hauls me back with a leash and says, okay, that's super cool, but most of our audience is not going to care exactly how they did that, spectroscopy in this particular thing. And she brings a lot of really fun.
I like to say I'm like the normal person in the podcast. I'm just like, I act as like your average listener, even though I do have some of that background too. I really try to be like, okay, what's our audience thinking right now? Or like, you just said this really weird thing that has nothing to do with really anything that we're talking about, but let's go back to that. What about that?
And speaking of, what is the triposcopy that you just mentioned? You just rolled that right in there, and
I didn't even
catch it. Yeah,
I think so. Spectroscopy. That's basically looking at how light passes through objects, and you can get a sense of what that chemical is, or that whatever you're examining, based off of how light hits it and responds to it. So it's really useful when you're looking at. They do it a lot in like when you're looking at stars, right?
That's what I was thinking of.
It,
yeah,
but having
look at us. We're all learning today. This is beautiful.
We got it. Absolutely.
That's funny too. And you guys out there, we were giggling a little moment ago because I was pointing at myself. I too, I don't have the degree, but I too majored in theater arts when I was in college at the University of Oregon, and much to my parents' chagrin. But I'll tell you what, it has been the most useful thing for sure in my career.
People really
doubt
like
about
to
it.
dump on like a theater degree, and if you don't have a plan, it can be difficult to make a living with just a theater degree. But I tell you what, I got some real hard skills doing theater at Davidson College, in part because I wasn't just studying acting. I was also studying playwriting, and I was studying directing, and I was studying scenic design, which was kind of the biggest part of what I did. I spent 4 years working in a scene shop. that gave me the skills to yesterday. We were working with a group of local students, and we were able to build a model hydroelectric dam right on the Chattahoochee River where we have an actual hydroelectric dam. That physical ability to think about constructing things and how it's going to be used, I practiced that for 4 years with a theater degree, and it comes in handy so often. And all you theater majors out there, use those skills because they are incredibly useful.
Absolutely. Badge of honor. Wear it proud and loud and go get it, because it is totally useful skills. I mean, you got to interact with people. You have to be able to communicate with people. You have to be able to tell a coherent story no matter what you're doing. I don't care what you're doing. My wife's in finance. She has to tell a coherent story to the rest of her team, or the whole thing folds up like a cheap lawn chair. So
I was exactly going to bring up accounting, arts. Right? Yeah, absolutely. Yes. It's all about telling a story, because telling stories is really how we change behavior and change mindsets. Telling stories is what we did before we had science and journals and the written word. It was talking. It was all talking, and that's how we passed information from generation to generation for most of humans' existence. It's only now that we have, some different tools to make that happen.
That's right. Well, let's hover on this a little bit longer. I love what you're doing in this space, and you're doing it effectively. What have you gleaned from this approach to telling the story of data, telling the story of research in a way that is discernible, palatable, entertaining, and illuminating about this world around us? What have been your observations about this? Has it been a wild success the entire time, or have you had some speed bumps? Like, how's it gone for you?
So I would say it is. I was shocked from day one how kind of naturally it came, because really all it is talking to scientists or conservationists like they're people, which is pretty easy because I talk to people all the time, and basically befriending people so they feel comfortable enough to share their truth. That's really at the core of what we're doing is making people comfortable enough to trust us with the telling of their story. And I think really what I have learned and discovered, I kind of always knew this, but every single person I have spoken to is an interesting person.
Totally.
Every single human that I get the opportunity to really dive deep in about their work has a fascinating story to tell, and it's worth listening to. Completely selfishly, we always say that podcasting is the best networking tool we've ever come across, is because you get to build a deep connection with somebody for 45 minutes to an hour that is, it's real, it's genuine, it's authentic. If it's not, it doesn't play on the airwaves, right? It doesn't sound good if it's not authentic. So it's just people coming together and sharing who they really are at their core internal self. And that's fascinating to people, because I think we live in a world where that doesn't always feel safe. It doesn't always feel comfortable to be exactly who you are for everybody to see. And I totally get that. I do that too, living out in the world. But I think humans are drawn to humans. We're a social species, and we lack sometimes the opportunity to connect with people on a deeper level. And so we seek that out wherever we can. And that's probably been one of my greatest joys with this nonprofit as a whole, is just getting to connect with interesting people really deeply.
Yeah, it definitely started as, for me, I was like, what could this podcast be about? And I was like, there's lots of things I want to learn more about. And I always use the example of physics, because I took a physics class in high school and it was fine. I didn't do great, but I'm like, I would love to learn more about physics, but I don't want to read a textbook. And I think a lot of people feel that way about sciences and biology and that kind of stuff, and the things that we're interested in and good at talking about. So I was like, we can be that for some people, a way for people to say, oh, this topic looks interesting. I want to learn a little bit more. And if they enjoy it, they can find more information somewhere else, maybe by going to the link of the person that we spoke to, or, finding a book from the library that has some more details. And so it's been really interesting to explore that. And like Chance said, honestly, it's sometimes feels almost a little selfish to run the podcast because it's like we get to meet and talk to some really, really cool and really interesting people. So it's definitely a networking tool too, which has been a definitely an added benefit.
Yeah, and you know the other thing I just read again this week is Gen Z folks have a really sensitive bullshit meter, and this article was saying that Generation Alpha, even more so, are going to be attuned to what is playing as a genuine human interaction versus a construct, a corporate media construct. And I think you're so right. The greatest part, and I've said this many times too, of all my favorite work, and I used to be a guide in Alaska, held true there too, but whether it's making documentaries or doing this podcast or the guiding, it was meeting these individual peoples and getting to learn their stories one-on-one and go into that depth. Because everything, you're right, has a depth of complexity. Of course it does. It's all part of this great interconnected universe and this part of nature, which is what we're talking about today. Strange that we went down. I didn't script the theater piece, and you know what? We're gonna have some poetry involved in this podcast today as well. But before we get into that, you are out in the field a lot. You're on the road a lot. How does that work? And do you dig going to people where they are to tell their story?
Yeah, definitely. It is something that we've talked about a lot. You know, we've been doing this podcast since 2019. And I think we've done one virtual episode on our podcast. And of course, this kind of being our second one with you. And we're going to be having you on our show later. Mm-hmm. But it has been really important to us to keep it a podcast that we record in person because, again, it almost feels a little selfish, but we really enjoy connecting with people face to face and just find that we aren't able to make that same connection virtually as we are to be able to, you know, whether it's working with a college and going to work with their students and their professors and meeting them and seeing their lab. It's just completely different than talking to them over Zoom or something. And then again, you know, you mentioned traveling a lot. A lot of that is for like conferences and forums that we work with, and we go to tell the stories of the people at these events, and we get to partake in those events as well. And again, it's part of that networking, and it's just, it is constantly leading us to figure out how we can evolve the podcast, how we can tell more stories, how we can partner with these people to expand their reach. So yeah, that's kind of, we just make it work, honestly. Sometimes it is like, oh my gosh, how are we doing all this traveling? Like, it's crazy. But
we really lucked out very early on in the podcast. And to kind of contextualize all of this, I think virtual stuff is a lot more commonplace today in 2024 than it was when we started in 2019. Thank you, COVID. There's a lot more infrastructure for conducting and connecting virtually than there used to be. But we really lucked out in that we had two events, very literally the first two things basically that we did with the podcast. One was we reached out to Grice Marine Lab at College of Charleston and said, hey, you've got a bunch of scientists that are all looking at very different things. We could come and be here for 2 days and get 8 interviews across 8 very broad topics. And really in a very cost-effective manner, because it's a podcast and it doesn't make money, we can come get these stories all at one point. And that worked really, really well. And then Sarah Catherine, who, like I said, is a very determined woman, found a conference in Dallas. Again, we're based in Georgia. Found a conference in Dallas that was happening in 2 weeks and said, Chance, is it okay if I shoot them an email and ask if we can show up and podcast there? And I was like, sure. I'm not going to be the guy that says, no, we can't do that, because obviously they're going to be like, no, we have everything set and there's no space, but we appreciate you and we'll talk next year.
We're very well balanced in the way that I'm like the pusher, and I'm like, hey, there's this thing in like 2 weeks. Can we go? And he's like, is that reasonable? But he let me reach out.
And they were like, yeah, sure, come on. And so we went to EarthX in Dallas in 2019 and
Nice.
got 27 episodes in 5 days, which
Wow.
was truly insanity. And we don't do that anymore. We
Oh my
dial
God.
back. Right?
Makes
You can
my
see
head spin just thinking about that. Wow.
it
Yeah,
was
it made ours spin too.
yeah. But it was the kind of exhausting where, like, after a hard day's work
Yeah.
and you've accomplished something,
Yeah.
you don't want to do it again the next day, but you're really, really glad that you did the work and got there. And so that's a lot of how we travel is we go in bursts and we go and record a whole season's worth or, most of a season across a week. And then we bring that home and we chew on it and we think about it and we record the week that we release the episode, which is usually a month, 2 months after we've recorded it. That same week that we're releasing it, Sarah Catherine and I sit down and have a conversation about what that episode meant and kind of how we felt about it and what are the key themes. And it really is this balance of like batching content in a really cost-effective way for a nonprofit podcast, but also being able to stay relevant to what is happening when it's released and people are hearing it for the first time. It's a super fun way to do things, even if it is absolutely exhausting at times.
Well, I get it, and I film like that a lot, like with the documentary and and lumping together the podcast episodes as well. That's just the most effective way to use time. And I also completely get that satisfied exhaustion piece of that thing. I mean, you've got gold, you have this beautiful wealth. Truly, when you're finished with all of that, and it feels to me it's akin to like the larder is full for the winter time. Like we've got all of our food for the winter gathered up, and there's just a very real satisfaction to that. So I totally feel what you're saying, and but even still, 27 episodes. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
that was too many episodes to get.
We don't do it like that anymore.
Yeah, you're young. So indulge me. I promised a poem. You're going to get a poem. And this just stuck out to me. I've been reading poetry every morning since I got back from this retreat several weeks ago. And it's been a great way to start the day. It's a portal into quiet and into that which is greater. And I just wanted to read this, and I'm going to have a question for you afterwards. So this is a poem by Mary Oliver called When I Am Among the Trees. And it goes like this. When I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, especially the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness, I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I'm so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment, and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often. Around me the trees stir in their leaves and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches. And they call again. It's simple, they say. And you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine. So,
I love that. Just like
it's lovely.
Reaction to that. That's fantastic.
It's just a beautiful, beautiful piece. She is just perfect. And working in this digital space on your own is tough. I do the same. I know what it's like. Working together as a couple, I'm sure, has its challenges. How are you making it all work and not burning out? And what feeds you along the way? And what are the luminous trees for each of you as you take this journey together?
I think for me, and kind of, I felt like this might be where you were going with reading that poem and what you might follow up with. And it made me think about the places that we do have the opportunity to go to and record. We are typically pretty intentional when we have an extra day that we can be out there, if it works with our schedule, to go and try to explore the area and get to know it and get out in nature there. And two of my favorite places that come to mind are, we've had the opportunity to work with the Sitka Sound Science Center in Alaska a few times.
Yes.
If you know them,
it's amazing. It's beautiful.
Sitka is beautiful, and the Science Center is just so amazing, and the people there are so friendly, and they have this amazing event called Whale Fest every year around Halloween. And we got to go out there twice, and those are the only 2 times I've ever been to Alaska, and just experiencing that place and that town right on the ocean is just like otherworldly, honestly. Like the connection you feel with nature in a small town like that. And the marina, I mean, every time we go, we see like sea otters and seals and bald eagles and just this crazy amount of wildlife, and being able to connect with it and enjoy it in that place and the nature that it has to offer is just so amazing. And it also kind of gives the sense of like, there's a lot of reasons why we do this work. The importance to share other people's science and to communicate it, but to see those wild and beautiful places, sometimes that just feels like, this is why we do this work. This is why it's important. This is what we're protecting at the end of the day. And, kind of what keeps us going. And another one of those places is in Sun Valley, Idaho.
I knew that's where you were going.
When we've gotten to experience the wild spaces up there, we got to go trout fishing. We got to learn how to fly fish while we were up there, which was so amazing. And just being able to experience some of those more untouched natural places is really amazing. And that's kind of what helps bring me back sometimes, and is a nice breath of fresh air.
And I think to kind of connect that to when we're not traveling and we're home and we're just sitting in our house, laptops on our laps, editing audio or sending hundreds of emails trying to figure out the next thing, and it just feels so disconnected from being outside. Anytime that we start to feel that kind of dip and that lull, we go to the river, which we're very fortunate here in Columbus to be on the Chattahoochee. And it was a very intentional choice when we got to the point where we could move out and buy a house and, kind of put down roots somewhere. We knew we wanted to be on the water. We both have, Sarah Catherine has worked in Hawaii and been on the water in Wales. And I've worked in the Caribbean and lived in Florida, and water is just really a through line for us as individuals and for us as a couple. And so in Columbus, we're right at the fall line. So I think probably most of the people who listen for you are out on the West Coast. So over here on the East Coast at the Appalachian Mountains, there's what's called the fall line that runs all the way from down here in Alabama up to, New England. And it's where that mountain range drops really fast, and then it levels out to the coastal plain for the rest of the ride out to the ocean. So our river drops about 100 feet over, I think, 10 miles in elevation. So that there's so much energy in our water here. And it has been that way for hundreds of thousands of years. This was a settlement for the Muskogee Creek Indians for long before European contact, because the river here is a gathering place for life. I think that is, and not just the whole river, but here specifically in Columbus, because the water has so much energy. When we're at a lull, we walk out to the river and we get to stand there and feel the sunshine and listen to this rushing water that never stops. Whether we're there or we're not there, that water continues. And it comes from the mountains and it goes to the sea, and you get to sort of stand there and see the great blue herons and hear the children that are laughing because they're getting to splash in the water, and just understand that you are a single moment in this vast stretch of time, and everything is connected to each other, and it always, for me, brings a sense of gratitude to be where I am and doing what I am with who I'm doing it with. It's just, I'm just so grateful for that. And that, it's like flicking a flea away. It just like completely eradicates that sense of disconnection and that sense of, loss of direction. It just immediately grounds me back into, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
You're speaking my love language, all of it. I mean, starting with the river, I do exactly the same thing when it's time and when I need to remind myself why I'm actually here. I head out to the Snoqualmie River, and every time, even if it's for an hour, a half an hour, much less a full day, it's a complete reset. It's a complete renewal of that exact phenomenon you were talking about being present in this moment in time, and what a miracle that is, this little ephemeral moment. And, of course, in my case, as you know, fascination, love, passion has been in salmon, and that added piece of these beings, these mystical beings in my mind, who come clear back out from the vast gyres of the ocean to the exact spot in that river they were born, the exact spot, to sacrifice themselves so all of life, capital L, can continue on. That just, it's never going to get old, and I hope, it never will. And
I think for us, it's kind of that equivalent of being an astronaut and seeing Earth zoomed out through the window of the space station. That completely perspective reset that happens when you mentally zoom out of your little digital box that you're sitting in and realize how connected we are. I mean, the electricity that is powering the laptop that we're having this conversation on, much of that came from the river that is, less than a mile away, because we've got hydroelectricity here in Columbus. It's just zooming out and being willing to expand beyond your little blinders is a complete perspective reset.
Well, that's a great segue because you're right, and you don't have to go on some vast voyage across the sea to experience this, right? And that's what you learn as scientists, and I'm sure the folks that you talk to in the conservation community will tell you the same thing. You can find as much wonder in a flower as you can in this vast, giant waterfall or landscape. You mentioned water. It sounds like you both have this deep affinity for water and waterscapes, but is there one particular entryway that is just for either of you, or for both of you, that is kind of your go-to? You mentioned the river, Chance. That's great, but for you, what would that be? Is there something that is sort of that instant portal that takes you back, big or small?
So I guess if you're asking what kind of body of water just lets me reset, it's definitely the ocean for me. Mm-hmm. Just the sound of it, the feel of it, it really is just it transports you to this other world, this other mindset for me. It's a complete reset every time I'm at the ocean.
And is there something also that is on the micro side, the small side, if the ocean is the ocean? Because I share the same, man, for sure, that sound and that vastness. But I was on this retreat and I had quiet time out in the wilderness, and it literally was this tiny little flower in the middle of the forest. And of all the things, I was sitting next to the stream, and of all the things, I was just taken in by this little flower for hours, literally hours. Do you experience that at all with your guests or their fascinations in the world of nature? What are some of those things that you've discovered as being these storytellers in the micro, in addition to the macro, the big picture?
That is an excellent question.
Yeah.
I think something relatively recently in the show that connects to for me is We did an interview with Dr. Barbara Blonders, who is a professor at Flagler College in Florida. Thank you. So good to be part of the team. St. Augustine. And she studies gopher tortoises. She's a fire ecologist, so she looks at how landscapes respond to fire and in general disturbance as well. And in Florida, they have hurricanes, as we've already discussed previously. Mm-hmm. And she did a really interesting study looking at how hurricanes change the ways that gopher tortoises use the landscape. Gopher tortoises here on the East Coast are similar to the desert tortoises you guys have further out west, like in the Mojave Desert. And they dig in the ground. They are really important species for over 300 different species of organisms use their burrows. They're environmental engineers. And I asked her, I did this thought exercise where I was like, I want you to imagine we're sitting around this desk, and on this desk is a gopher tortoise. Describe it for me. What do you see when you look at a gopher tortoise? And she was pretty taken aback by the question, because I think that a lot of times scientists don't get engaged in those kinds of emotional thought experiments very, very frequently. And just her description of this. So to describe a gopher tortoise, they're probably 18 inches long or so, maybe a little bit longer. They're more pancake shaped. They don't have really domed shells. They're sort of your classic olive greenish, grayish, brownish turtle looking things. And she described the way that when you look at them, they just feel like they have this wisdom to them, this kind of timeless,
like
connection.
An old wizard.
Yeah, like an old wizard. And it was just her fascination with just the organism, which I think a lot of people would walk by and go, oh, cool, look at that turtle, which is completely fair. But for her, that was, practically her life's work is understanding how they think, how they move, how they interact with the environment, how the environment interacts with them. And that really reflects, it resonated with me. And I've been scuba diving for most of my life, and it's cool to see shipwrecks and reefs and all this big macro stuff. But some of my all-time favorite experiences as a diver is when I went to sit on actually it was while we were teaching, so we had to do a navigation course. I'm a scuba instructor. We're doing a navigation course for some of our students while I was working out in the Caribbean, and what that meant was we're going to put about 55 students through an underwater maze, but you get to use a compass, basically, so that you can prove to me that you know how to use a compass. And so we had 5 or 6 instructors sitting at various points in the sand where there was no identifying characteristics. And you're going to sit there for about 3 or 4 hours at 15 feet and receive students and then point them to their next thing. And so a couple of times a summer, I would spend 3 or 4 hours just kneeling on the sand, occasionally interacting with students. But when I tell you that some of the most fascinating things I've ever observed underwater came from those 3 or 4 hours at a time, a lot of people don't believe me because you're like, oh, you got to see sharks and blah, blah, blah. No, it's the little Christmas tree worms that don't pop up until you've been completely still for 10 minutes. Or it's the sand-colored fish that you thought were sand because they weren't moving. But when you stop and you just consider that even the barest scrap of sand on the ocean floor is teeming with life that you would never notice if you don't take the intentional time to stop and sit and allow yourself to just be still. I love it. I really, really resonate with that sense of like, here's a small thing that I'm going to focus on for an extended period of time to try to really understand its entirety, not just what it is when I see it at first, but what it is when I see it 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later, an hour later, right? You get a different perspective the longer you look at something.
In the truest sense of the word, that is wonderful.
It is. It is full of wonder.
There's nothing I can add. That was perfectly told. Thank you.
He's a good storyteller.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I was right with you. And we're gonna zoom back out to the macro again to start winding our tail up for the day here. But where do you guys think we're headed with the health of our planet? And what do you feel each individual can do best to heal our wounded world?
That's a great question. I think there is a lot of hopelessness in our field and our world right now, especially in regards to the environment and the climate. But honestly, telling the conversations that we get to tell and sharing those stories has given me, and I think Chance as well, a lot of hope that change is possible. There are things that can be done. And I think that people just being willing to have conversations with each other, so many times, so often we exist in this vacuum and we have our own little world and our own little ideas, and most of our friends probably agree with the same thoughts we have. And so when we come into conflict with people and there's someone who doesn't agree, it can feel like, well, I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, so I know that I'm right, and there is no possible way that you could be right. So I'm just going to think that you're wrong and that you're now the villain in my story, right? But I think there is so much growth that can come from us just being willing to have conversations with other people and meet somewhere in the middle, because, that's how we grew up, right? Like as kids, it was just like, oh, we weren't raised the same. We don't have the viewpoints, but like, let's talk about this. Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Without anyone feeling like, ooh, if I say this, they might think I'm a bad person or they might not agree. And so then we're going to get into an argument. So I just don't want to even have that conversation. I don't want to go there. So I think just if everyone were willing, or even if more people were willing to open up and have conversations, I think there's a lot of hope for the world and our environment in general.
Wonderful.
Yeah, to add on to that, I think what you can do, what each individual can do best to create the brightest possible future for our planet, is to just love the planet. Make time to experience it without expectation of anything, without being like, this is going to be the most beautiful hike I've ever been on. I hope it is. I hope that's true, but just creating space to have a relationship with the planet we live on is the single most important thing you can do, because having a relationship with the planet informs the decisions you make that affect that planet. And it doesn't have to be, I'm going to sell my car and go homestead in the Alaskan wilderness so I have the tiniest possible footprint. That's not possible for most people. But knowing that we have an impact on the planet, that is always going to be true. I mean, that's a scientific fundamental, right? Is that observation changes the outcome. It is impossible to observe something without in some way affecting the outcome of that thing, right? You think about, we thought for the longest time that praying mantises, when they mate, the female frequently eats the head of the male at the end of mating. That's a myth that has been around for a very long time. Well, it turns out no, they mostly do that because somebody's watching them mate, and that's kind of a stressful thing, and they don't know if they're going to have enough energy to run away at the end of mating or whatever. It's primarily because they're being observed. So giving yourself space to understand that existing in the planet means changing the planet, full stop. You can change it for the better, you can change it for the worse, and you're going to do a little bit of both throughout the entirety of your life. But having a relationship with the planet means that more often than not, you're going to be doing things that help it rather than things that hurt it. And having those conversations, like Sarah Catherine was saying, is a great way to share that experience of just loving the planet.
What a great conversation, you guys. You just molded two questions into one. You hit me at the pass about how can we help heal our divided country too, and you eloquently spoke to that in this beautiful answer you gave. Well, winding this down here, each of you, I'm sure, have maybe favorite episodes. You're over 100. You're 120 some episodes.
I think 124. Yeah.
Yeah. Holy smokes! I know they're all unique and they all have their own beauty. But do you each have a favorite episode, and why would that be? And Sarah Catherine, I'll start with you.
Yeah, that is a great question. I have two that come to mind. We did an interview with the director of the Smithsonian Natural Museum of History. Is that right? Mm-hmm. A while back. This was probably in 2019, one of our very early episodes, and it was, I think it was a shorter episode. I think we kind of called it a mini episode, but they had a new exhibit coming out, and he got to tour David Attenborough around the exhibit, and that was a fun story to tell. And he also told us about, they have a giant squirrel room with just like thousands of types of, these stuffed squirrels that they've collected over the time of like all of these squirrels in the world. And that was just a really fun and engaging episode. And like you said, we've been able to tell so many, so it's hard to pick one, but that's a lot of the times when someone's like, oh, what episode should I listen to? I'm like, this one's pretty good.
Yeah. I think for me, that is an excellent episode.
Was that Kirk Johnson?
Yes,
it was.
So Kirk, I've been to his house here the house his folks had here in Washington, and he is a dear, close friend of my friend Ray Troll, who of famed salmon T-shirts, and they've done all sorts of stuff together, and I've filmed them together, and he is a super engaging guy. So I'm going to listen to that one too. So
yes,
thank you. And Chance,
well, tell him we say hi.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. I certainly will.
Yeah. So that was truly an excellent episode. I'm cheating a little bit because I'm going to talk about an episode that happened relatively recently in season 9. Actually, I think it's the one that we launched season 9 with, which is our most recent season, called Rattlesnakes Are Umbrellas. And we recently kind of went through this revamping of the podcast where, we were about 4 years in and we wanted to be a little more intentional about how we were growing into the future. And so part of that was diving a little more deeply into the science and giving space to just really explore it and have fun with it. And so we got to talk with Joseph, who is a wildlife biologist at Jekyll Island Authority. Jekyll Island is a barrier island off the coast of Georgia here. And they have a subspecies of eastern diamondback rattlesnake that only occurs on Jekyll Island. So there's basically an eastern population, a western population, and the Jekyll Island population.
Wow.
They're genetically distinct. They're very interesting. They have to respond to kind of different environmental pressures than mainland snakes often do. But their population has been able to remain isolated because it's very difficult for a snake to get on or off of Jekyll Island as opposed to some of the other islands. And we just got to spend like 45, maybe 50 minutes really chewing into the ecology of snakes on the island. And Joseph was just amazing about communicating his science. And sometimes you talk to a scientist who is really kind of nose to the bench. I do the work and then somebody else communicates that. And that's totally fine. There's people out here that do that job. Joseph is not one of those scientists. He is very intentional about finding ways to get his work into the hands of people who care, like the residents on Jekyll Island or the people who come and visit the island for vacation. And so it was just one of those magic moments where you really vibe with somebody as soon as you meet them. And, we actually, some of the people that he works with worked on the same diamondback terrapin project that I worked on in my undergraduate. That's kind of a long-term study. And, we connected so well that he was like, hey, I also have a small-scale mushroom farming organization where I sell mushrooms to the local restaurants and stuff. You should come by my house and come see how I do things, and I'll cook you up some of our giant king oyster mushrooms. And it was like this feast of, like, it tasted like ribs, but they were mushrooms. And yeah, it was just a really cool guy and a really cool episode.
Oh man, that sounds phenomenal. What a great day. And you get to record that. And, that's interesting. That's kind of the thought process behind the salmon business that we started with Ava's Wild too, that folks, you experience these things and the stories speak to you, and then you get to take them in literally, like almost like a sacrament. And And you're telling me this story here right now, so that feels kind of validating. Thank you. That's really good.
Yeah, I love
really
it.
Good. Well, listen, you're not going to escape here without going through the bonus round, and everybody gets it. So don't feel like I'm picking on you, but it's just a fun little thing that I came up with. It seems to be interesting to folks. So just a thought, a little imagination game here. Let's say the river is rising, and as we know, with things out there these days, this is not an impossibility. And you only have moments to you get each other out and your loved ones, and if you have pets, you get your pets out. The loved ones are all accounted for. But if you could only have time to take one physical thing, what would that one thing be for each of you?
So it is a great question, and I love that you do this after every one of your episodes. And I will say we've listened to your show, so we knew that this was coming. So I'm prepared, thankfully, because this would have really caught me off guard. So I think, and who knows if it actually came to it, I might come up with a better answer. But the answer I came up with is that we have this little ceramic lizard that we got in Mexico while we were traveling to Mexico, and we hide it around the house for each other to find. It's this little game that we play with each other just throughout the week, and when one of us finds it, we hide it for the other one, and it goes back and forth. But I was like, yeah, I think I would save that. That would be a good little memento to save. So that's my thing.
The lizard is actually in the room with us right now.
Where's the lizard?
She has no idea where it is, and I can't give it away or else she'll know.
Oh, my God. This makes me so happy. This makes me so happy. I think I'm going to start a new tradition. This answer has never been given, and I think you're going to start a new tradition here in the Titus household. So well done on you. Chance, how about you?
You should get a little salmon, ceramic salmon or something.
I think you're right. I think
you're right. Or like a little salmon
ornament
ornament or something. It can be anything.
That's going to happen. And we have those. So, yeah, this is beautiful. Done. Learning every moment.
Done.
Delightful.
So, for me, I was thinking really hard about this one because I'm definitely the hoarder between the two of us. I have a lot of stuff, which is not awesome. But I have one of my most treasured possessions is an ukulele that was given to me kind of relatively early into us dating. My mom got it for me as a birthday present. And I've been playing since I was in high school. And I actually have Portuguese Hawaiian ancestry, so I still have family out on Maui, and we can trace my family back to the Ravenscraig and the original machete, which is the instrument that was brought over in the late 1800s that became the ukulele, belonged to an ancestor of mine. The first one that was played in Hawaii. That is in a museum somewhere is connected to my lineage. So which is wild. I didn't know about that until probably I had been playing for 10 years. And my mom was like, "Did you know?" Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, "You didn't think to tell me that earlier?"
He's full of these random facts. This is like part of why I fell in love with him.
Man, if I didn't know you better, I'd say you got to be making this up. This is so cool.
But it's totally true, and it's completely out of the blue. So that's obviously not the one that I own, but I was given a really nice performance quality one that I've had for several years, and I actually played it while Sarah Catherine was walking down the aisle in our wedding in Hawaii, and then I played it again at my brother's wedding reception a few years ago. So it's this single instrument that's kind of been in both of our weddings, and he's my only sibling. So I think if I had to grab one thing, it would be that ukulele that I love so much. It's actually the same instrument that I used to record the music for our podcast when we were just like figuring things out, and I was like, all I have is a PA system and a ukulele, and I need to make some sort of intro outro song. So that particular instrument is really valuable to me.
You too. It's just delightful, man. All right. Well, one more part of this exercise. If you only could take one trait about you that makes you unique in all the world, what would that trait be? And Chance, I'll stay on you.
Ooh, I'm less prepared for this question. I think I have always considered myself very empathetic, almost to a fault. And I just, even when I'm in conflict with somebody, I can't help but see things from their side and be like, I get it. It's okay. And that has led me to a lot of issues in my life. And I'm still kind of dialing in when it's good to be that empathetic and when I have to take a harder stance on things. But it is really at the center of who I am is an ability to empathize with somebody else's perspective and understand that and try to work to a way to connect somebody. So that would be my trait.
Beautiful. Sarah Catherine?
Chance pointed out pretty early on in our relationship that I'm a very tenacious person. And I think I kind of always knew that, but I didn't know what to call it or didn't really recognize it. But I think I really value that tenacity that I have. So I think I would save that.
Beautiful. Sarah Catherine and Chance Reuter, hosts of Conservation Connection, amazing podcast. How can folks get in touch with you or follow what you're doing?
Yeah. So we're most active on our Instagram channel, Conservation Connection. You can find us there. We are trying to be better about posting regularly. So that's where you'll get most of our updates. And then our website is conservationconnection.co. So you can find us there as well.
And then you can listen to our podcast wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. You can probably go find us. We're on pretty much every platform. We worked very hard to get our RSS feed included in a lot of places, so it's easy to listen.
Wonderful. What a delightful, illuminating conversation. I'm so grateful. Thanks for jumping on today. I can't wait to go on the other side of this thing, and you're going to get your chance to grill me sometime here in the future. Hoo-ha.
I'm very excited to have you on the show.
Well, I can't wait for that either. And for now, we'll bid you adieu. Hopefully the Chattahoochee just stays calm and you're not going to deal with any of that. But for now, we'll see you down the trail.
It was really weird but super fun to be the ones being interviewed for once.
Yeah, it was funny to be on the other side of the microphone, I guess, even though we were technically on the same side.
Yeah, Mark is really just a great guy. I've really enjoyed getting to know him and hang out with him over the course of becoming podcast buddies. And if you want to be podcast buddies with us, you can shoot us a text on the Conservation Connection hotline. That phone number is 706-505-0582. Again, that's 706-505-0582. You can shoot us a text, and if you show me that you've left us a review, share us with a friend of yours, or just tell me how you found out about the show, we'll even mail you a free sticker pack.
Or if you just want to text us to chat, you can send us a text telling us what you loved from this episode, what you want to know more about, and we'll send you a response.
And it's really us, it's not robots. It's literally just me with a cell phone smiling because I got a text message from a listener.
Yeah, it definitely makes our day.
So, with that fun little bonus episode being all about us, what do we have lined up for next week?
Next week, we'll be releasing the first episode that we recorded at the Sun Valley Forum in July. So the first episode that we're releasing from Sun Valley will be with Melissa Garvey from the Nature Conservancy. The Nature Conservancy is always so wonderful to have on the show. Everyone from there is so knowledgeable, as they should be and have to be in that job. So we're very excited to start getting those episodes out in front of you to listen.
Yeah, it was a super fun trip. It was over my birthday this year, so you'll get to hear some interviews that were recorded on my birthday this season. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and we'll see you next week.